The Unitarian Universalist Church of Ventura, California, presents Backpacking Reflections with Bryan Buck, David Henkel, Maura Raffensperger, and Mike Sixbey, recorded on Sunday morning, September 6th, 2020.
Good morning and welcome to worship with the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ventura. We are a learning, growing, nature-exploring, and wonder-seeking community of resistance and resilience. Our minister, the Reverend Dana Worsnop, is away today. I am Worship Associate Krista Mendelsohn, and I am joined by Worship Associate Jim Merrill and a whole host of folks who have collaborated to bring this service into being, including our guest speakers, Bryan Buck, David Henkel, Mike Sixbey, and Maura Raffensperger, who are members of our own adventurous UUCV backpacking group. We will be treated to reflections and photos from each of them sprinkled throughout our service today. Here is the lineup of our entire tech team. Today, our director is Brian Fortune. Our assistant director and video editor extraordinaire is Kitty Merrill. Today's magician and photo editor extraordinaire is Sue Brinkmeyer. Joe Osborne is available for tech support on the phone or by chat, and Joe will post his number. I remind you all to please stay muted unless you are in a breakout room. I also remind you, if you have not already done so, to join in making our online community more inclusive by adding your pronouns along with your name if you're joining us by Zoom. For example, I use the pronouns she, her. My colleague Jim Merrill uses the pronouns he, him. You might use other pronouns such as they, them, or others. All are welcome. It is so good to be together once again. Let us enter sacred space.
We hope that you have a chalice or candle and something to light it with. We light our chalice this morning with these words from the website banner of our own Camp de Benneville Pines. My heart is in the mountains. Let's light our chalices together. Let us come into worship this morning, called by the poem Autumn Gold by our UU backpacker Mike Sixbey, read by Mike himself.
Autumn Gold. The trail wanders and meditates through womb-like Sixbey Valley towards soothing hot springs, calm and tranquility. 3 days of autumn gold. I mine the gold with my eyes, warm, rich, comfortable, savory gold, easy to soak in, easy to enjoy and store in heart and soul for blue days or brown. The cottonwoods twinkle and scream gold in the brilliant sky. They shimmer like aspens in the breeze. The willows are gold. The sycamores are gold. The leaf-carpeted trail is soft and gold. The grass is gold. The air is gold. The bright, smoky sun is gold. Warm amber in the evening.
Thank you, Mike. That was beautiful.
Good morning. My name is David Henkel, and I will be sharing a story for the child in all of us. Our seventh principle says that we have respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. This is one example of when this principle comes to life. This story was inspired by the Sixbey trip to Willett Hot Springs that was also the inspiration for Mike's Autumn Gold in his opening words. It was the winter of 2018, and my grandson Graham, age 9 at the time, joined Mike Sixbey, Joyce Sattler, and I on our first backpacking trip without mom or dad. We headed into the Sixbey wilderness. Our trailhead was Piedra Blanca, and our destination was Willett Hot Springs. We made it to Oak Flat that first day, a distance of 6.5 miles, following the relatively flat trail along the Sixbey Creek. We'd gone about 3 miles in when it was obvious that it was time for a very serious lesson: how to poop in the woods. We had had the talk ahead of time, and Graham was ready. He had all the supplies. We found a secluded spot in the chaparral off the trail with plenty of privacy. I showed him the proper depth of his cat hole, 6 to 8 inches, and left him to do his business. When he emerged triumphant, we returned to the scene of the crime and properly marked the spot and documented this rite of passage. So here's a brief introductory lesson on how to poop in the woods. First, the location you choose is important. In addition to being private and secluded, here are some other considerations. At least 200 feet from water, that's creek, river, lake, and also 200 feet from camp and trail, where the soil will allow the proper depth of 6 to 8 inches, not near an anthill. Trust me, I know this one from experience. Not near poison oak. Never done it. Hope I never do. And perhaps a vantage point with an awesome view. And being an early morning person, I like to find my spot the night before. So let's review the preferred equipment to do the deed. You might want to use a trowel like this. This one is lightweight, and I like it especially when the soil is rocky. Some people, notably the intrepid Mike Sixbey, will use the heel of the boot instead. Does he really achieve the proper depth? Only he knows for sure. I recommend toilet paper, though the purists might use broad leaves. The advantage of the latter is there's less to pack out. Yes, no trace Joyce Sattler taught me to pack out the used toilet paper. It can be done. A note about quantity. You might want to bring a little extra just in case your companions are low on this vital supply. And your first aid kit must include Imodium. I like the comfort afforded from baby wipes, especially on the longer trips when foregoing a shower for multiple days. These too get packed out. I like to reuse a dehydrated food pouch to stow away the used toilet paper and wipes. A small supply of hand sanitizer is required when the deed is done, and it's also good to use prior to every meal. Lastly, it is customary to cover the site with a medium-sized stone as a courtesy to the next backpacker. And then there are the special occasions when you're not allowed to bury your doo-doo. I learned this firsthand in July of 2017 when we decided to summit Mount Whitney. There used to be an outhouse at the summit and others along the trail, but in August of 2007, they were removed by the Forest Service. It was just too risky to remove the stuff by helicopter. Keep in mind that nearly 25,000 people attempt to summit Whitney each year. Can you imagine the sheer volume of you-know-what that would be generated. So on our descent from 14,505 feet, we entered the Mount Whitney zone. Every person on the trail is required to carry and use, when needed, one of these in the Mount Whitney zone. It's called a WAG bag. WAG stands for Waste Aggregation and Gelling. At the end of the trail at Whitney Portal is where you deposit your gift. So now you know almost everything you need to know when it's time to poop in the woods. You will know so much more once you have done it. It's a great way to start your day on the trail, and will put a spring in your step and lighten your load. Let us know when you have completed this rite of passage, and we will welcome you to an elite group of intrepid backpackers.
Thank you, David. I think I was laughing and smiling through that whole story. Each Sunday, this congregation gives away our collection to an organization in the larger community or to funds that help people in our own church. We now invite you to donate online. You'll see the link in the next slide, which will also be posted in the chat as a direct link. Our offering today goes to Buddy Nation, an organization that helps the homeless dogs of Ventura with veterinary care, spay and neuter surgeries, food, and supplies. John, not his real name, has 2 dogs. Let's call them Fido and Rover. The 3 of them spent years on the streets with John, often asleep or passed out, and the dogs standing guard over him. Buddy Nation started working with them about a year ago when they were at the Oxnard shelter. We followed them back on the streets and brought in counselors to talk with him. John suffers from both a severe heart condition and COPD in addition to addiction issues. As Buddy Nation worked with John, Fido, and Rover, we learned that his addictive behavior was compounded by Asperger's syndrome that was previously undiagnosed and untreated. His behavior had made it difficult for him to stay in shelters. We kept at it and brought him to the hospital 3 times in 1 month, took the dogs to the animal shelter, retrieved him and the dogs, and got him complete medical care, including diagnosis and treatment for his conditions. John now lives safe and sober at one of the local motels that participate in Project Room Key, where he can live long-term with the medical and social services that support him. He is a delightful, highly intelligent, and witty person, his old self. The dogs are safe and happy, and now just dogs, not guard dogs. They are enjoying their pampered pet lives, and we take the 3 of them out every week for a car ride and lunch at McDonald's. We at Buddy Nation know that only with a hands-on approach can we really get people back on their feet in one way or another. Please give generously as you always do. And now we'll hear from Maura Raffensperger and her reflections on backpacking.
Why do I backpack? I ask myself this question in the first 5 minutes of every backpack I have ever done. The answer invariably comes later in the trip, after I've adjusted to the weight of the pack, found a comfortable pace, and been rewarded with the sense of serenity that pulls me to the wilderness. I knew none of this in 1975 at the start of my first backpack. Sometime in my first years at the University of Arizona, someone had mentioned hiking to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and it sounded cool. There was no planning to speak of. We just picked Thanksgiving because we had 4 days off from classes. The we would be my friend Jenny and her boyfriend Doug. My roommate Pat lent me her down sleeping bag. A pharmacy classmate lent me the backpack and canteen he had used in Vietnam. Doug provided a canvas pup tent from his Boy Scout days, and I bought my first pair of hiking boots. The ranger was not impressed when we showed up to get our backcountry pass. He looked at us, looked up at the gray sky, looked at us again, and skeptically asked if we had ever backpacked. "Oh, yes," I said breezily. He sighed and reluctantly issued the pass. To say that trip was a learning experience would be an understatement. My new boots gave me such bad blisters that I limped into camp. 3 people in a pup tent meant for 2 meant that Doug and I slept against the tent walls. Jenny was in the middle, which became very interesting when it began to pour that night, and our sleeping bags got soaked as they wicked the water from the canvas. The hike out was just as memorable. Rain at the bottom of the canyon meant we were breaking trail through snow for the last several miles of the trail. The water in my canteen froze, something I'm pretty sure it had never done in Vietnam. The switchbacks seemed endless, but putting one foot in front of the other finally got us to the top of the canyon walls, and euphoria. Surprisingly, I did not consider this trip a miserable experience. For the first time, I discovered that a backpack left me with a reservoir of peace deep inside that I could continue to draw on, similar to what I now get from attending a service. I learned something about resiliency. I discovered the value of having a community to share resources, the importance of relying on each other, and the power of moving forward one step at a time. All of these are lessons I have relied on for over 40 years, but I found them first in backpacking.
What a great story, Maura.
I invite you now into a time of meditation. Take some moments to arrive fully in this holy moment in time. Breathe. Continue to breathe with intention as Mike Sixbey shares photos and his words entitled, "I Backpack."
I backpack. I go into the creation to nourish my spirit. And I go to be with my creator. And I find her in the hot sun, in the cold mist, the rain, the snow, the frost. I find her in balmy day and storm. I find her in my pounding heart in the thin mountain air. I find her in a conifer cathedral. I find her in soothing wilderness hot spring. I find her in mountain lakes and streams. I find her in hot barren deserts, in amber and gold sunsets, in cold dewy sunrise, in pounding waterfalls, in honeybee gorged in pollen, in flower-strewn fields, in silence and in thunder, in companions, in full moon and speckled sky. I find her on mountaintops, in butterflies, ants, pine cones. I find her everywhere. I find her because I am alive.
Let us enter a silent meditation.
Good morning again. I would like to share with you my discovery of amazing cathedrals. The images you are seeing today are a peek behind the curtain. I am humbled by the beauty and majesty. Here, there is a sense of the sacred. It is a place where troubles fade and clarity emerges. I noticed three elements on these treks into the wilderness. There is the inner world of meditation, a time for introspection and personal growth. There is a connection of community and the joy of something very special shared with a few dear souls. And this happens in the most amazing places, unscarred by humans, where our scale in the universe can be truly appreciated. This reflection is about backpacking, not hiking, though that is another worthy meditation. You see, I yearn for the more remote wilderness. I finally become immersed on the second day, 10 miles in. We found the world's worst and all responsibility. The path is heavier than I would like, and yet I'm drawn up to the alpine meadows and lakes, up to the cold streams that help me to know. I will always remember the ascent up Half Dome and how I kept my fear of heights in check to make it to the top. Things got serious when we approached the granite staircase. On either side of the steps, chiseled into solid granite, the mountain falls away. Up we went. We approached the cables and the angle of ascent increased to 45 degrees and still we moved up. Through it all was Joyce Sattler's calm voice encouraging me to look ahead, breathe, stay within myself. For me, it is more than just a fear of falling. It is a realization that death is possible from these heights. Joyce gave me what I needed, a kind of unconditional love that told me I could do this in spite of my fears. Our backpacking comrades have certain understandings. Call them a covenant of sorts. Stay together on the trail. While we each may be in our own meditation, we prefer it if we can see one another or hear one another because we look out for each other. We share our state of being. What are our struggles in the moment? It could be a small ache or pain, or we may be concerned whether we can even take one more step. We remind each other to drink and eat before we are thirsty or hungry. We also know it's a good practice to POPC. Pee often, pee clear. We also share the joy and excitement of our discoveries, and we do so with the beginner's mind. It helps to have a child along to learn from. Often that child goes by the name Mike Sixbey. One of the things I relish about activities of physical endurance is the kind of focus and concentration the journey brings. There is no room for worry or distraction. Each footfall matters. The pack may be heavy. The granite steps may rise 20 inches or more, one after the other after the other. And yet I'm driven on. Perhaps it is the compulsiveness, or perhaps it is the endorphins to which Reverend Dana referred not so long ago. Some might say I'm goal-oriented. I have to be reminded or remind myself, life is not a race. And yet, our hymn says, guide my feet while I run this race, for I don't want to run this race in vain. Backpacking is such a metaphor for me. And then there is the return from the journey, when the draw of home and love pulls me. My pace quickens. The sense of accomplishment is sweet. I throw a knowing glance to Bryan Buck, and he is in tears. I join him. So we discovered on our latest trek on the Ray Lakes Loop that we all agreed life is fragile. Maybe I need to venture 45 miles into the wilderness, gain 7,000 feet in elevation, summit a pass at 12,000 feet just to gain clarity. Who knows? So how is it I answer the call from Mary Oliver? What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Well, for one thing, do more backpacking.
Thank you, David.
Hi, my name's Bryan Buck, and I'm here to talk about joyful adversity and backpacking. It was Memorial Day weekend 2019, and I had just returned from a backpacking trip with a few of the UU hikers and members of the Henkel family. In total, there were 9 of us, ranging in ages from 9 to 74. Our goal was to hike the Gene Marshall Trail from Rays Creek to Piedra Blanca, 18.5 miles in the Los Padres National Forest, in an area known as the Sixbey Wilderness. The trail should really be named the Gene and DeLee Marshall Trail. DeLee was a member of our church who had come to the beach campouts that we had at McGrath and Emmawood State Parks. She also had a role in preventing a dam from being built on the Sixbey River. We started at an elevation of 3,950 feet, climbing to 6,120 feet, and descending to 3,000 feet over 3 days and 2 nights. We were happy, joyful to be together, hiking into the wilderness. Adversity was not even a thought. My own journey with hiking started when I retired and sought to fill my time with activities from younger days. I walked regularly in preparation, only to discover that I was out of shape for serious backpacking. That became clear when the group went to Manzananeros in 2018. Following that hike, I needed physical therapy for a shoulder injury. I joined a gym and spent the next year learning about my physical limitations. You see, I like to be physically active. Hiking is one way to accomplish that while adding a sense of adventure to life. There's also a spiritual component to being out in nature that draws you closer to Mother Earth in a way that cannot be duplicated when living in the city. On the first day of the hike, the weather was perfect. We were greeted with cool temperatures in the low 60s, a partly cloudy sky, and a fresh breeze. The trail was modestly uphill, and the ensuing views were awe-inspiring. Still, we had a late 10 a.m. start due to the travel needed to reach the trailhead. With a goal of 8 miles to go and at an average speed of 1 mile per hour, we expected to reach our first camp about 6 p.m. That's not how it turned out. The 60 and over group walked slower than the under 40. By the time 6 p.m. came around, the older half of the group had managed 7 miles, while the younger ones were somewhere ahead, well on the way to our intended camp. I was exhausted, getting cold, and hungry for a warm meal. So after some discussion, we older folks pitched our tents, enjoyed a meal, and climbed into our sleeping bags for some well-deserved rest. There is another story to be told about David Henkel grinding out that last 8th mile to represent the over 60 crowd. David was carrying the tent that he and his grandson Graham were sharing, and therefore needed to catch up to his family. What none of us knew was that the next mile included a 1,000-foot climb on a trail that would narrow to the width of your foot. It was getting dark. David, making that last effort at the end of a long, tiring day, showed real grit and love for family. For the older folks, the second day of backpacking started at 8 a.m. It looked like this part of our hike would be about catching up to the rest of the group and then continuing our adventure. We had 5 miles to go to get to our next camp of what should have been an easy day. It was during that very tough 1,000-foot climb that snow flurries appeared. It was kind of charming and magical to be part of that moment in the raw beauty of the nature we were experiencing, except that this was only the beginning of the weather becoming more challenging as it progressed to light rain followed by heavy showers. The conditions forced us to break out our wet weather gear. When we got to our next camp, it was 2:30 p.m. It was windy, cold, and the rain was coming down hard. We hurriedly pitched our tents and dove in for shelter and warmth. An unexpected storm front had moved in. The weather was so severe that it would be the next morning, about 16 hours later, when we would come out of our tents and see each other again, venturing out in the night only long enough to answer nature's call. These were some adverse conditions, and they weren't really joyful moments. The temperatures had dropped overnight, turning the rain to icy snow and freezing the outside of our tents. When we rose at 7 a.m., the clouds were gone, revealing blue skies, and the sun was beginning to rise. We warmed ourselves in the sun's rays, prepared our breakfast, dried out our tents, and with our spirits lifted, we began the final distance of 6 miles. We had an initial descent of 3,000 feet in 3 miles. That's very steep and hard on your knees and ankles. And up to now, our time in the Sixbey wilderness had been injury-free. We had encountered bubbling streams, bear tracks, burned forests, lush vegetation, and native flowers. On this third leg, we saw poison oak in large quantities for the first time. Still, we kept on because that's how these things work. We had come too far to turn back. We made it to Piedra Blanca, which is a magnificent outcropping of granite rocks near Rose Valley. There'd be 3 more easy stream crossings before our adventure would end. So what do I mean by joyful adversity? What is joyful about adversity? How can adversity be part of an experience that you also call joyful? How can something be both? In the case of our hike, I think joyful adversity is about the experience of learning to do things, to do hard things, and that includes how you do those hard things with others. It's not unlike helping on buildings and grounds workdays pulling weeds. The value of camaraderie, being with like-minded folks in such times, can make all the difference in your attitude. Hiking is, in many ways, a solitary pursuit. Conversations on the trail with others happens, but mostly your focus is on the path, navigating the rocks and branches that are natural obstacles to be avoided so that you don't trip and fall. This part of hiking, the silence of the trail, takes on an almost meditative aspect as you struggle with your own unique issues while in the company of friends who are on this journey with you. Away from the distractions and fast pace of modern life, you have time to turn inwards. It was unexpected that our weather would turn foul. I did not know how steep the trail might be, or if my feet would blister or become black toe under a nail. I expected poison oak, but did not know how thick it would be. We did not intend to lose the trail, which we did, and I did not expect to have so many streams to rock hop across, all while carrying 35 pounds in my backpack. There were other physical and mental difficulties to overcome, like sore, aching muscles and bones, fears about bears and rattlesnakes, and self-doubts about being able to complete the hike. I did know that these things could happen. That's part of hiking, and it's simply part of being aware. So what does it mean then to knowingly participate in an activity that has difficulties and challenges versus being in a situation like that which you did not purposely choose, one that is unexpected and is filled with adversity? So when you choose, it's an opportunity to experience lessons in learning how to do those hard things that I mentioned, learning about perseverance, persistence, and resilience. This is practice for real life, and practice like this, however you encounter it, can build a reservoir of knowledge and inner strength that some call character. That's a trait you need for those really difficult times in life when true adversity strikes, such as the loss of a job, loss of your home, or the death of a loved one. When you choose, you know that there's a beginning and an end, with the end being a recognition of the accomplishment of a goal. We learn that we can do more than we ever thought and are joyful at experiencing life's treasure. When adversity strikes unexpectedly, sometimes tragically, you're often left with loss that is unimaginable. The commonality is that your life still goes on and that returning to a happier state of being is part of what it means to keep putting one foot in front of the other, just as we did in those steep climbs and descents, while rock hopping across streams and avoiding poison oak. Dealing with adversity is not easy. You keep moving forward. You have to, because giving up does not lead to a desirable outcome. I was humbled by my companions on this hike, those older than me, and I am marginally envious of those younger. We all handled our loads and managed the trail at our own pace. We worked together as a team, and always we were alert to hazards to warn us for each other. I'm not certain how the 7 principles fit in when it comes to joyful adversity. It's not the same as joys and sorrows, that part of having lived a full life. Perhaps the 3rd, 4th, and 7th principles cover the idea, the acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are part. You can't undertake a journey without understanding that you need to accept your companions as they are, just as they must accept you. Expect that you will need to give and receive aid. This necessary sharing, I think, is a fundamental part of growing spiritually. Certainly it means that the search for truth and meaning is unique to you, just as each footstep was for all of us on that weekend. And you cannot help but become clear about your role in the interdependent web when surrounded by the magnificence of nature. Or maybe it's really all about attitude, staying positive, because the alternative, being negative, is not helpful. However it is that you've experienced joyful adversity, my guess is it was part of something in your life that made for lasting memories and the recounting of stories with friends. It is in the going through of such an experience, one filled with struggle, where life reveals to us that in the end, it was worth it. That's where the joy is found. Thank you.
Please join me in extinguishing your chalices at home. We extinguish our chalices, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we come together again.
And now go in peace, go in love, go forth enjoying these words again from Mike Sixbey, titled Screaming Wind.
Screaming wind. The white-capped ocean is sugar-coated and sparkling in the sun's bright light. The Hoyo Potrero is slicked down and golden brown, a river of dry flowing grass. The sky is vast and cerulean. The smog is pushed to the horizon, far beyond Anacapa. Birds are in their nests. Deer are in their thickets. Foxes are in their holes. Mosquitoes are quiet. Coyotes are in their dens. The mountain lion is in his lair. The mole is burrowed deep in the ground. Bees are in their hive. Ants in their hill. But I am out of my safe, warm home and into the mountains, where I lean on a fierce, cold wind. My mind, my soul are humbled by the power and majesty of this wind. My body is exhausted. My eyes are wide. Hot adrenaline flows. Up Shumash Trail, I follow the blasting wind. It rushes threateningly as I head over the saddle and up the steep north side. I lean on the wind as if leaning on my God. I doubt the wind as I doubt my God. I fight the wind as I fight my God. I need the wind as I need and love my God. My eyes water, my ears ring, my nose gushes. Goosebumps rise on my flesh. My knees shake, my mind frets. The wind gusts hard and throws me into the sage and sumac like a puff of cotton. I, in awe and fright and pride, continue over Magoo Peak and down the south side. I become peaceful, becalmed. I am with my screaming God.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to Backpacking Reflections with Bryan Buck, David Henkel, Maura Raffensperger, and Mike Sixbey. Recorded on September 16th, 2020 for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ventura, California.